um, and a few other names. Sister Warda, good to see you. Um, Alhamdulillah, good to see all of you. And inshallah, we will try and get a bit more interaction going. But alaikum salam, Maysara. We'll try and get the interaction going in some of the other once we start the hikam. But we're just trying to frame things now. So Bismillah, as we always do, feet on the ground, spine upright. We're just going to take 3 deep breaths just to ground ourselves. Diaphragmatic breaths, breathing from the bottom of the belly all the way up to the chest and right to the tip of the throat. And gently exhale without efforting. Complete exhalation. One last deep breath. Then we're going to take some moments just to be silent, just under a minute, just to find our intentions and what is it that we're intending from this place of hopefully stillness and the sense of attention. We're intending true knowledge. And all true knowledge is a knowledge of disclosure that further aligns us with the trajectory of who we really are, who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala really is, and what that relationship entails. What that relationship entails of perception, but more importantly, what that relationship entails of becoming, of being. We are human beings, which is a state of being, to be. We intend to connect ourselves to the Quran and the Sunnah and the sources of Islam, primary sources of knowledge. We tend to connect ourselves to the hearts that have been the carriers of the realities of those sources in a sense of continuity until the present age. And we seek all of this ibtigha li wajhillah, purely and utterly for the sake of Allah. So we're going to go into our hearts, try and find some of this sincerity, and then we'll start the lesson. Bismillah. فاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد الفاتح لما أغلق والخاتم لما سبق ناصر الحق بالحق والهادي إلى صراطك المستقيم وعلى آله حق قدره ومقداره العظيم. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا من فضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. So Alhamdulillah, we're going to continue with our framing of the Hikam, and we did mention that we're going to cover three biographies, and in the last session we covered the biography of Sheikh Abu Hassan Shadili, and in this session we're going to cover the life of Sayyidi Abu Bakr al-Mursi, who is the Sheikh, the teacher of Ibn Ata'illah al-Iskandari, whose biography we'll cover in the next session, who's the author of the Hikam. And Ibn Ata'illah al-Iskandari is the one who actually wrote a book from which much of the information we're going to use in today's session came from, about the life of his Sheikh, i.e. Abu Bakr al-Mursi, and his grand Sheikh, Abu Hassan al-Shadli. For those of you who are part of the WhatsApp group, you'd have received the reference text. It's called Lata'if al-Minan, which has been translated by Nancy Roberts. And it's about the life of Sayyid Abu Bakr al-Mursi, wa Shaykh Abu Hassan, and his teacher, Abu Hassan al-Shadili. And so we're going to continue focusing on this kind of biographical odyssey. And I wanted to preface by saying I appreciate that a lot of you being very patient in the sense that we're not having as much interaction per se as we probably would have wanted in the beginning when we said that this will be an interactive kind of series of lessons. And part of that is because we want to finish this narrative of framing. But inshallah ta'ala, when we start the Hikam, inshallah, we will try and really delve into it in a way that I think a lot of you have got so much to teach me. I can straight away see some of the names here, Sidi Matthew and many of the others who, you know, mashallah, have so much to give, and so I've got so much to learn from all of you. So I'm really looking forward to that. So just to continue with this biographical kind of setting, if you remember the last class we were discussing the life of Sheikh Abu Hassan Shadili, and so in this class, with regards to Sayyidina Abu Bakr al-Mursi, his full name was Shihab ad-Din Abu al-Abbas Ahmed ibn Umar ibn Ali al-Khazraji al-Ansari al-Mursi. And he was born in what is written as, or in English, an Anglophonic kind of pronunciation would be Murcia. But those of you who visited the part of Andalus or Spain, southeast Spain, know that the C is pronounced as a th. So it's Murcia, Murcia, which makes Abu Bakr very interesting. Abu Bakr from Al-Mursi, Abu Bakr al-Mursi, the Murcian, is that he is of European heritage, right? He's of what you call modern day Andalusia or southeast of Spain, which also makes him very interestingly the second major Murcian, the second major pivotal figure for Murcia, and the first prior to him, or roughly, they were roughly contemporaneous, and it's possible that they shared similar teachers. Abu Bakr Mursi would have been younger, but Ibn Arabi was also born in Murcia, and just makes you think about the rich heritage that the Muslims have, that you have these two amazing figures at roughly the same time. And not far from them, another great figure is Abu Madian, who was born in what's known as area known as modern day Seville. So anyone who kind of thinks about the rich Muslim heritage, I mean, technically, this is a European heritage as we geographically classify it today. And this is a big part of the Muslim kind of spiritual legacy. Now, Sayyidina Abu Bakr al-Mursi, his ancestry is thought to go back to Qais ibn Sa'd, who was so it's a very noble ancestry, because Qais ibn Sa'd was known to be an emir who was under the khilaf of Sayyidina Ali. And from Qais itself, Ibn Sa'd, that should give it away, that he is the son of Sa'd ibn Ubadah al-Ansari, who was the leader of the Khazraj These are the two Sa'ds. There was Sa'd ibn Ubadah, who was the leader of the Khazraj, and there's Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, who was the leader of the Aus. So, see, Abu Basim Rusi's heritage goes back to this kind of very influential Sahabi. And his family itself were very well-off merchants, and they were involved in trade, but they were also very religious, and they were keen to give their children a strong education. And so Abu Bas and his elder brother Abu Abdullah Jamal, his name was, they were known for the type of education that was known in Andalusia at the time. They would go to these Quranic schools where you'd have the lawh, this board, and then you'd write on it with a black kind of chalk, because they'd be using charcoal. So it's a whitish board using black. And there was obviously, these are kind of stories we have of his childhood, which kind of gives you a flavor of who he was, even as a young child when he'd go to these kind of Quranic schools. And it was said that he became a hafiz at a very young age. So he memorized the Quran. But at a young age, from the narrations we have, is that a person saw him, and it was kind of implying, maybe there were signs of Abu Abbas al-Mursi being inclined to tasawwuf. Maybe this person meant this mockingly, or maybe he had a mistaken understanding of what tasawwuf is. And so he says when he saw him memorizing the Quran and memorizing, Islamic knowledge through this form of the lawh, which is the type of literacy that they have at the time, he said, Inna Sufi la yusawidu bayadan. So he says, indeed, the Sufi does not blacken whiteness. And by which he meant, you don't engage in this kind of knowledge, right? And maybe he meant that mockingly, that, Sufis tend to be illiterate or so on. And Abu Abbas al-Mursi, as a young boy, and he was known as Ahmad, and Abu Abbas is kind of a kunya, but he's also known as Ahmad ibn Umar. And so he responded, and this is kind of one of the signs that he was, had this kind of astuteness at a young age. He says, the matter is not as you claim, rather, inna Sufi la yusawidu sahaifa bidhanubi. He said the Sufi is not the one, the Sufi is not the one who blackens the whiteness of the pages that will be his life, the scrolls that will basically be bearing witness to how he lived his life. So that's what he doesn't blacken. As for blackening this white slate, this is a type of literacy. But blackening the slates that will eventually be determining your lifespan, that's what the Sufi doesn't do. So it's an interesting kind of, as a young boy, that was his response. And it said that he was already under the mentorship of kind of Sufis. So one of his main teachers was known to be a Sufi at the lodge, and he was also his Quranic teacher. And he was kind of educating him, because even at a young age, Sidi Ahmed or Abu Basim Mursi goes to see what are kind of these phantom light shows where they use kind of puppets and the shadows to kind of create this kind of fun kind of phantom show for kids. And the next day, his teacher pulls him aside and says, "Oh, you who watches phantom images in wonderment, you yourself are the phantom, if only you were to really see." And so this is the kind of discussion that his teacher's having with him, that, inquire into who you really are. What is the reality of your own existence? How different are you from these images that are reflected as shadows, but are still in the hands of the controller who's controlling them, than your own existence? And so he has this kind of interesting religious upbringing, but he's still involved in his father's trade. And it says that at the age of 24, now there's a bit of difference as to, but he set sail on this ship with his father for ostensibly for the Hajj to Mecca. There is a bit of difference as to whether it was purely for the Hajj or whether it was also hijrah and migration, emigration. Why is that? Because if we look at around about the time that he's setting forth, this is about 640 after the hijrah of the Prophet's Islamic calendar, and 1242 in the Gregorian calendar. And if we understand that date, then that's precisely when the Christian Reconquista is taking place in Andalus. So Cordoba had already fallen 6 years before, at 1236. Seville is about to fall in a few years, and the last remaining tributary state becomes Granada. So it's a time when Muslims were under persecution. So there's a strong likelihood, because he's going with his entire family. It's not just him and immediate sibling or his father. He's going with all the family. So it could well be that they were going on Hajj and also going on Hijrah, but or emigrating from Andalusia. But as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's qudra and qadar would have it, that at the age of 24, the entire family on this ship are off the shores of Tunisia. They're hit by a storm. The ship capsizes, and there are only two survivors, which is him and his brother. And they manage to swim to shore. And this is how his life starts off in Tunis, or Ifriqiya as it was known at the time. And they basically start settling in this area of Tunis, and they take up trade and commerce as a profession. Now, Sidi Abu Abbas Mursi was already given to literacy, and he was given to being a hafiz, and so he was able to teach the Quran. And so what he did is he first cemented his Quran at this zawiya in a Tunisian lodge, and then he started to teach there. And in his teaching now, subhanallah, it's as if he's now looking for a teacher as well in the spiritual path. And if we pick up the story of the trajectory of Abu Hassan Shadli's life that we covered in the previous lesson, then round about the same time, Abu Hassan Shadli had been, just prior to that, sent to that same area of close to Shadila, which is a place next to Tunis. And he's undergoing this state of retreat in the mountains of Zarwan. And we had discussed this last time, and it was probably worth reflecting, just to take some of these points of reflection from their lives, that he had such a powerful apprenticeship with Mullah Abdus Salam al-Mashish, and he's been told about his spiritual rank, and he's been given the portents of what his life would entail, and to the point that the parting words of Mullah Abdus Salam al-Mashish is, "Oh Ali," which was his name, Ali, as we remember when we were discussing. And he said, Allah, Allah, Allah is Allah, wa nasu nas, and people are people. Therefore, let Allah's remembrance live every moment in your heart. Leave behind all dependence on people and keep your heart from inclining towards them. So it's this kind of strong counsel to remain in the companionship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this heart presence with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And his last words, Abdul Salam, to Sayyidina Abu Hassan Shadli was, do not refer to people unless Allah orders you to do so. So in other words, even he's got this direct communion with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then Mullah Abdul Salam says to him, he has perfected for you your authority and wilaya with him. So he said, so say, "Oh Allah, I ask your mercy, and that I do not incline or yearn for people. Protect me from their evils and provide for me by me not seeking help from them, and set me apart from them, for you are the most capable and powerful over everything." And this is his last words. So Sidi Abu Hassan Shadli, or as we remember, his name was Ali ibn Abdul Jabbar, on that instruction sets out for Shadila. Now, this is what I wanted to focus on, is even though he goes there, he still goes into retreat in this area called Jabal Zarwan, the mountain Jabal, and he goes into this Jabal Zarwan region, and he goes into a cave. Now, having been given this kind of bushra, and glad tidings from his sheikh, why is he still going in a cave? And the biographies say that he still felt that after everything he went through, he hadn't received the idhn. Now, remember, he got the idhn from his sheikh. His sheikh even read out for him, or literally through a vision, saying, this will happen, this will happen, this will happen in your life. But Sheikh Abu Hassan didn't feel he received the idhn from Allah and His Messenger. Now, that is something very powerful. When I was sitting with some of my teachers, I was seeing one of them today, and he said, how does one know? Well, in general, you've got your idhn is the idhn through a silsila of people who are connected. And if your teacher tells you, this is idhn, but it's a type of real sincerity when a person doesn't just get that and run with it. And I was discussing this with another brother who's, interestingly, both his parents have got idhn, or one of his parents have got, his father's got idhn in a spiritual path. And then his father very candidly told his son, he said, but I haven't got idhn from Allah and his messenger. I'm just a caretaker. I'll help people, I'll guide them, but I know I haven't got it yet. Which is what a big difference that is from the idhn hunters or the idhn seekers who are literally prior to, planning their spiritual careers. And I remember somebody once told me there was a person who, literally asked the sheikh, he goes, what do I need to do to become a sheikh? And the sheikh responds by saying, well, by not asking questions like that, because this affair is not given to someone who seeks it. And so one of the whole definitions of one of the key criterions of a sheikh is not with his nafs, it's not with his ego. He's purely seeing himself as a conduit for Allah's will. And so part of this sincerity is that it's not sought. And the nature of the tasawwuf, and now to go back to the institutionalization of the tasawwuf, we have to be candid, gives a type of soft power, which is why you have the phenomenon of the fake sheikh and how prevalent they are. And so we have to recognize that as I said before, the existence of uh, the fakeness or the counterfeit doesn't preclude, or rather actually presupposes that there must be something genuine there. So don't throw the baby out the bathwater. And Sidi Abu Hassan Shadi is an example of that. So he stays doing retreats and he has a companion. He's not fully alone. Said that he had a companion with him. One of the people who was also a person who was given this kashf. He had a lot of visions. His name was Abdullah ibn Salam al-Habibi. That's what the books say, that was his companion. And it said that they used to go on this rigorous schedule of not eating nothing but herbs in the fields and going into this kind of asceticism. And there's some interesting narrations that they were kind of in these caves and they would say, maybe we'll get an opening now. Maybe we'll get an opening now. And Allah would like send somebody who just some random passerby, who's obviously another wali of Allah, who literally says, what do you think about someone who says, maybe I'll get an opening now? Maybe I'll get an opening now. No opening and no wilaya for such a person. And then walk off. And they would realize that Allah sent such a person because the very sense of expectancy is what precludes the arrival of the spiritual experiences. If you have a sense of control, and this is one of the hikam, the aphorisms of Ibn Ta'ala, that they say the waridat, the spiritual openings don't come except baghtatan, except suddenly, as a way of preserving them so they don't give delusion that you have somehow brought them about through determinism, through your own effort, because that just inflates the ego. And so then they let go of this type of tadbir, they let go of this type of spiritual control management. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them some openings. So they had openings in this kind of retreat. And we discussed some of them, some of the interesting lessons they had. The narration about Sheikh Abu Hassan was sleeping on top of a hill and lions come and he feels completely safe. And then he comes down, descends from the hill, and then some partridges or pigeons rise up and he gets completely petrified. And then a voice comes because he's already in the state of communion with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We'd say hatif al-haqiqi, some kind of true voice speaks to him and says, you were finding peace and intimate companionship because you were with us. And the reason why you're scared is because you were with yourself. So he's getting this kind of lessons. And, part of that is that when he finally feels he's got permission, he goes to Tunis. And we touched upon how he encounters tribulations from the local governor, the local chief qadi, which is not coincidental because a lot of the time those most in opposition to Sufism are those who are given this exoteric knowledge in a way that it's inflated their egos. So they think it's the summation of all knowledge. And so they find they cannot understand this other knowledge, which has this channel of inspiration. And so they have enmity towards it because a person is given to enmity to that which he doesn't understand. So this chief qadi stirs up the local ruler against him. And there's a whole tribulation that happens to Sheikh Abu Hassan. But to cut a long story short, so we have the intersection between their lives. Sheikh Abu Hassan, gets freed and then he goes for Hajj. But for some reason, he keeps coming back to Tunis. And as we'll come to know in the story, he does that because he's waiting. He's waiting for Abu Bakr al-Mursi. And how do we know that? Because at the point that Abu Bakr al-Mursi is finding courage to visit Mullah Hassan al-Shadili, he's reticent, but he decides he's going to visit him the next day, and he has a dream. And in that dream, he basically sees himself climbing up to the top of a hill where he sees a man clad in a green cloak with someone on his right and someone on his left. And in that dream, Abu Basr Mursi looks at the man, and the man says, لَقَدْ آثَرْتَ عَلَى خَلِيفَةِ الزَّمَانِ. You have found the Khalifa of this age. And then he wakes up. And so Mullah Abbas Mursi takes this some kind of glad tidings for the because he's going to meet Mullah Abdus, he's going to meet Sheikh Abu Hassan Shadli the next day. So he goes, and lo and behold, the place he's going, and he's going up this hill, seems to match very the small mosque that he enters into is it's all matching his dream. And then he comes in and he sees Abu Hassan Shadli, and he's dressed exactly the way he was in his dream, and that person to his life, person to his left. And he literally looks at Abu Basr Mursi and he says the very same thing. لَقَدْ آثَرْتَ عَلَى خَلِيفَةِ الزَّمَانِ. You have found the Khalifa of the age. Now, it's very interesting. Now, obviously, in a normal sense, to make da'awi, to make a claim, I am this, I am that, is very unspiritual. But we have to understand that from an exceptional category of some of the people who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made his awliya, there's an understanding that they've been asked to speak from lisan al-haq, to make clear who they are so that people know. And this comes back to even the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, Ana Sayyid al-Adam. I'm the best of the bed of Bani Adam, and I'm not boasting. He was told to say it. And so there are a small subset of awliya, most of them are hidden. This is the way of the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because that which is precious is not given to make apparent to everyone. But there is a small subset whose role and function is to make clear something, and therefore they tell people who they are. And this is how we'd interpret this, that when he says, I'm the Khalifa of the age. Now note the word Khalifa, as we touched upon before, that what is real Khilafah? It is this realization of all the various vestiges, i.e., the names by which Allah wants to be known, such that you become the name, the totality of the names. In other words, that's when you're the Khalifa. You are the conduit for the divine power to be manifest in this world. And when Mullah Sidi Abu Basr al-Mursi, he says, who are you? And as in after then he says, he gives his lineage. Then Sheikh Abu Hassan says, you were يعني رفعت لي, you were raised for me 10 years ago. As in, I knew and I've been waiting for you for the past 10 years. Now, sometimes when we see these stories, we find them incredulous, and I'm only sharing this. There is someone I know who is actually a very relatively public figure, but he's not said this to many people. In his own spiritual path, and he's a convert to Islam, he goes and travels to different communities, and he finally becomes a Muslim. When he meets his spiritual sheikh, and this comes out through like almost like an accident, like he's about to marry someone, and the wife says, here's a misbaha. I want you to do this dhikr. This is my sheikh's misbaha. He does the dhikr, and then the other way, in the far away, the sheikh has also got a misbaha, and then he senses who he is, and then they talk, and then the sheikh tells him, he said, I was with you from the day you were born. And this could sound like one of these statements that I just made, but then the sheikh proceeds to recount, and this is a true story that I've heard from that brother himself, different periods of his life when no one could have known it, even to the point that he says, do you remember that point when you were on the hill in that place, and there was a man who sat next to you, da 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 da, and he says, that was me, da 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 da. Now, the fact that we have stories like that even today, that this brother, that he became so connected to the sheikh, and the sheikh passed away recently, but the sheikh was known as one of these, they call it mukashafi, like he has kashf, he can see things. So why am I mentioning this? So that when we hear these stories of the past, we don't think they don't exist today. And there's a very public story that is known, and if you get a chance to watch the clip, you might know this, that when Sheikh Hamza Yusuf mentions how he ended up finally meeting Sheikh Murabit al-Hajj, Murabit al-Hajj actually says something to him very similar. He said, I've been waiting for you, or I've been expecting you to come. And so we don't know how this intimacy of spiritual familyness works. How does this spiritual communion work, where you are connected to someone spiritually, and someone within that spiritual relationship has this vantage point to be expecting you, you know, and knows about you, even though you've never met them. And so this was a very interesting thing. And so then Sayyid Abbas and Mursi's, period of being under Sheikh Abu Hassan starts. Um, and it's very interesting that they're still in that part of Tunis. And obviously, this is these beautiful days for Sidi Abu Bakr Mursi. As I said, his name was Ahmed. And then all of a sudden, Sheikh Abu Hassan Shali has a dream that says they have to go to Egypt. And this is something that saddens the Abu Bakr Mursi. And Sheikh Abu Hassan just looks at him and says, Ahmed. And Sheikh Abu Bakr Mursi says, yes. He says, Allah created Adam and caused the angels to bow down to him. And he caused him to dwell in paradise. But it was on earth that he was meant to be a Khalifa. As the Quran says, وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ, when Allah says to his angels in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse number 30, إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً, that I am making on earth a Khalifa. Sayyidina Adam's being a Khalifa was not on Jannah, it was on Khalifa. And so then Sayyidina Abu Basim, Abu Hassan Shali says to Abu Basim Mursi, he says, Ahmed, he says, no, that the nuzul of Sayyidina Adam, his descending from Jannah to earth, was a nuzul that was karamatan, la ihanatan. It was a descent to honor him, not to abase him. In other words, sometimes you have to go from places of comfort, even physically, to places of discomfort, and definitely metaphorically from places of comfort to places of discomfort, from places of ease to places of hardship, from places of happiness to places of sadness, to places of expansion, to places of constriction. But it is in those difficulties, constrictions, and hardships that you become the Khalifa, not in your areas of comfort. And this was a beautiful lesson that was given. And that was actually how it was meant to be. Because as they arrive initially in Egypt, they're not that well known, even though it was still a time of the Ayyubid Empire where they would give patronage to Sufis and so on. And they would soon benefit from this. But when they initially arrive, it's very hard. And they don't know where they're going to get their food from. So they arrive very exhausted and famished, and somebody sees them and sends them food. And at that point, Shaykh Abdul Hassan is still teaching his disciples. So he says, let none of you eat it until I tell you to. And then the next day, the morning comes Fajr, and then he says, now spread out the cloth and eat it. And then he says, the most halal of the halal is that which you didn't expect, that which you never requested, and it comes to you. And so then they start eating, and then there's some special lessons that Mullah Abdul Salam Sheikh Abu Hassan Shadili starts giving to Abu Basim Mursi. Now this happens in Tasawwuf as well. This is one of my I was speaking to Sidi Ahmed, Sheikh Ahmed Saad al-Azhari, and he was mentioning that part of the tariqah structures, if we take away the formalities of tariqahs and so on, is all about your connection ultimately to the Sheikh. And within that, there's always an individuated relationship. There's a special relationship, and that's in the direct instructions that he gives you. And that's where the secret is. And that's where, somebody said in the question answers, and I recorded something, that why there's so many turuq, or more a case of finding it difficult to understand that there are different turuq. Why isn't there one? The reality is there's a lot, there's a number of turuq as there are, some ulama say, the number of breadths, right? To the degree of anfas al-khalaiq. Why? Because every single human being's tariqah is individuated and unique. And we see this right from the inception of the Prophet's time to his direct interaction with the Sahaba. He doesn't interact with all of them the same way. So sometimes when you're interacting with someone and you're actually preparing them for a very strong spiritual responsibility, the instruction can be a lot tougher than on other people. And that's why Sheikh Abu Hassan Shadi tells to Abu Basim Mursi, he says, if you want to be my companion, then you're not allowed to ask anything of anyone. That's a pretty strong request. You're not allowed to ask anything of anyone. So Abu Basim Mursi says, I lived in accordance with his instructions for 1 year, which means effectively they're in this foreign land and he's not allowed to ask anything of anyone. And that's usually how things come. And people, you ask someone something in this foreign land and you get it. But he said, um, he said, I was able to comply until after a year. Sheikh Abu Hassan Shadi looks at Abu Basim Mursi and says, if you want to be my companion, then accept nothing of anyone. Now, how do you do that? And so Abu Basim Mursi says, if you can't even accept a gift, and someone could say, well, this is all halal. I mean, come on. Even the Prophet ﷺ saying you don't reject gifts. But we have to understand this is a different type of tarbiyah happening here. And in the tarbiyah, there is a permissibility for a period of time, not as an absolute. The hukam is completely permissible to take a gift. But if it's about something that is training the nafs, then you can make the mubah something at a personal level or an individuated level for that person that you shouldn't take as a test, as kind of a challenge for the nafs. And people used to do that. Sometimes to discipline the nafs, they say, I'm not going to eat this. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to deny myself something. And it's kind of training. So now Abu Bakr Mursi is told that he's not allowed to accept a gift from anyone. So he says he used to feel so hungry and the hard times. He used to go to the shores of the Alexandrian Sea and gather whatever wheat of food was cast ashore as it was sometimes being unloaded from the boat. So they just cast something. So he's basically searching for castaway food and eating of that. And what's interesting, he says that was a year of spiritual openings for him. And then he comes to see who his sheikh really is. Now, here's another question. Somebody asked me, how do we know who the sheikh is? How do we know if he's a real sheikh or not? Now, to some degree, there is some objective criteria in the sense that the Sharia has to be there. Don't fall for any sheikh who doesn't follow the Sharia. And there has to be some sense of consanguinity, there's some sense of connection. You feel he's close to Allah and His Messenger. There's a felt sense that this person is in His presence. You're feeling drawn towards Allah and His Messenger. But the reality is, you won't know who your sheikh really is till you enter into that relationship. It's like when we talk about marriage, right? We have sometimes marriage counseling, somebody's premarital counseling, and they're trying to get to know the other person as much as they can. And at some point, anyone who's had any experience in marriage says, look, you're not going to get to know her really until you take the plunge. And to a large degree, you're not even going to get to know yourself until you take the plunge. Because it's only after marriage, in that crucible of the interaction between the husband and the wife, and that the fire of relationship, that your weak points can sometimes be reflected and magnified. So you get to work on yourself. And then if Allah's blessing comes and you grow in that relationship, then there's a type of sakina and you become like garments unto one another. And then you get to know the other person from a very intimate perspective. And, you know, as analogies go, obviously there is differences of relationship here, but the nature of the tariqah is also this intimate relationship between you and the sheikh. And this is a kind of spiritual fatherhood where it's not premised so much on physical companionship as much as spiritual companionship, where when the hearts become connected, you get to know more about who your sheikh is. And then the ulama of the Tasawwuf actually say that as you get to know who your sheikh really is, you get to know who the Prophet really is, and you get to know who Allah really is. Because there are doors unto one another. The reality of your sheikh is a door unto the reality of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the reality of the Prophet is a door unto the reality of Allah. And this is an exact analogy when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Ana madinatul ilm," I am the city of knowledge. Wa Ali babuha, and Ali is his gate. Because it's almost as if Sayyidina Ali was the first door unto the Prophet ﷺ, in terms of that lineage of being doors and doors and doors and doors and doors and doors unto this Medina tul ilm, this Medina which has a deeper meaning of just the Medina is that which grounds, that which has finds governance at the most balanced way. And the Prophet ﷺ was the most balanced representation of all knowledge, which lets you know who Allah is. And so in this period of outward deprivation, Abu Basim Mursi is having this inward growth of realization. And then, as usually happens, in the ma'al-usri yusra, in the ma'al-usri yusra, after hardship comes ease, after hardship comes ease. And alhamdulillah, yani at a certain point, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opens up the dunya, even though Sayyidina Abbas al-Mursi and Abu Hassan Shadi have zero interest in the dunya, and an Ayyub Sultan, an Ayyub Sultan confers upon Abu Hassan, as a religious endowment, one of these enormous towers, the kind of citadels that are arising from the walls encompassing the city of Alexandria. And so it was an enormous tower with various floors. And at that point, Abu Hassan Shadi lives with his family on the top floor. Another floor was converted into a tremendous mosque, and another floor was converted into a zawiya with cells for meditational retreats. And at that point, the tariqah takes off. And we said that so many of the most influential scholars come into the Shadi tariqah. Izzuddin ibn Abdus Salam. What a great scholar. Jalaluddin Suyuti is part of the Shadli tariqah. The great Shafi scholar Al-Mundari becomes part of the Shadli tariqah. So many of the great scholars are becoming part of the Shadli tariqah. And also, at that point, Sayyid Abu Bakr al-Mursi becomes so close to Sheikh Abu Hassan Shadli that he gives him his daughter in marriage. He gives him his daughter in marriage. So he becomes the son-in-law of Abu Hassan Shadli. And at that point, one of the habits of Abu Hassan Shadi, which is very common, is that he used to often go on wanderings, and he used to go for Hajj, and practically every year. And they say that even towards the end of his life, when he loses his vision, then he used to still travel. And more than that, as we discussed at the last class, that towards the end of his life, in the year 646 after Hijrah, or 1248 in the Gregorian calendar, he actually goes to fight in what's known as the Battle of the Mansura, which was to stop the Seventh Crusade headed by St. Louis of France. And this was under one of the last rule of the Ayyubid dynasty, Najmuddin al-Ayyub. And Sayyid Abu Hassan Shadi is going to fight, literally. And that's why he gets stationed in a place called Muqassam, which is just, most of you know, Cairo will know there's an area called Muqassam there. And he's stationed there. And Abu Bakr Mursi is now taking over a lot of responsibilities in the Zawiya. Now, just this story gives you an understanding of their connection, that Abu Bakr Mursi is in Alexandria, and it's as if he has a waking vision, not a sleeping vision, a waking vision of Abu Hassan Shadi appearing and saying, Mecca and Medina? And Abu Bakr Mursi then doesn't hesitate. He literally heads straight to Cairo, or the area that is known as Muqassam, and he literally comes into the presence of Sheikh Abu Hassan Shadli. And as soon as he comes in, Sheikh Abu Hassan Shadli looks at him and says, Mecca and Medina, which is exactly how that waking vision was. And Abu Bakr Mursi says, this is why I've come, Master. Now, you'd think that's because they're going to go on Umrah, right? Or the pilgrimage was Hajj, I think that was Hajj coming up to that time. And so that's what Abu Bakr Mursi is thinking. So he's brought the money for that, which at that time, I don't know how these conversion rates work, but he's got 10 gold coins, 10 dinars. And so Abu Hassan Shadi says, what do you have with you? And he says, I've got 10 dinars, which is enough to travel there and come back. And Abu Hassan Shadi says, sit down here now. It's okay. This is all spontaneous knowledge. Just sit down here. And all of a sudden, a man comes in. And the man says, he said, Master, I wanted to make the pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina, but I have nothing in my name. And Sheikh Abu Hassan Shadi turns around to Abbas and Mursi, says, give it to him. Now, he's come Mecca, Medina, and somebody else comes and says, Mecca, Medina, I want to go on pilgrimage, and now give it to him. Abbas and Mursi gives it to him. This is the kind of tarbiyah that's happening. He gives him the money. And then after that, the Sheikh tells Abu Bakr Mursi, okay, now that you're here, all this Mecca, Medina, whatever, he came here, he gave the money to this other person to go on pilgrimage. And he says to him, I want you to go and buy for me 20 ardabs of wheat. I don't know what the measurement of that is, but this is the measurement that's given, ardabs of wheat. Now, Abu Bakr Mursi has literally given all of the wealth he's had to this person who's come in saying he wants to go on pilgrimage. So now, how's he going to buy 20 ardabs of wheat? Now, he's not going to say, he doesn't turn around, he's not going to say to his sheikh, he said, Sheikh, you just told me to give all of this money to this person. How do you expect me to buy 20 ardabs of wheat? No, because it's all about he trusts in his sheikh. And so he literally goes and buys the 20 ardabs on credit because he doesn't have any money. So he offers to pay back at some point in the future in the hope that he'll get the money because he doesn't have it on him at the time. This is pre-banks where he can withdraw money or whatever. So he's going to hope to go back to Alexandria at some point, get his money and pay the person. So after he's got the wheat, he goes back to Sheikh Abu Hassan and he says, he gives it to him, and Sheikh Abu Hassan literally tells him, oh, I've been told this wheat has worms in it, so we can't take any of it. That was that. So he's literally bought the wheat on credit now, and he's been told it has worms in it. And from a position of societal recognition, he can see that there aren't any worms in this wheat, and he feels there's no platform for him to return it, because you don't return food on credit. You can return other items, but you can't return food. And so now he's in a quandary. What does he do? And this is a kind of a spiritual test for him. One day goes by. He's got this wheat. He can't return it. He's now taken on a debt that he's struggling to think how he's going to pay. 2 days go by. 3 days go by. And the owner of the wheat now is likely to demand its price from him. On the fourth day, a different man comes to see him. And he says, are you the owner of the wheat? Because I've heard you've got some wheat on you. He said, yes. He said, will you take 1,000 dirhams for this? Now, don't ask me how I calculated it. Dirham means silver. And I calculated that the exchange rate between a dirham and a dinar at that time was 14 to 1. So 1,000 dirhams becomes about 70 gold dinars. And remember, before he had 10 gold dinars, which is enough for him to go on Hajj and come back. So he gets 70 gold dinars. Somebody offers him to pay an inflated amount of money just because he's holding on to the wheat. And then he can go and settle off the debt. And now he's got so much more money. And he comes back to Abu Hassan Shadli. And then he says, and this is a story in Lataif al-Minan, he says, when he narrates the story to Ibn Ta'ila, he says, if I told you I'm still living off that money to this very day, I would be speaking the truth. And the story in that is, I mean, the story doesn't go on to say whether they did go to Mecca, Medina. I assume they did. But the story in that is his complete submission to his sheikh and conviction and willingness to be in this burning crucible of uncertainty to wait for the unfolding of some wisdom. And this is so illustrative of the type of tarbiyah he's having with Abu Hassan Shadli. And as we said in the previous lesson, Abu Hassan Shadi passes away in this remote town called Humaythara, almost knowing that he's going to pass away. And so although they're ostensibly going for Hajj, he kind of predicts that that will be his last place. And so they travel with a pickaxe and a shovel. He has a private conversation with Abbas and Mursi. He announces to people that he's his successor. And he says he's one of the gates of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he passes away. At that point, Abu Bakr Mursi takes over, and inshallah, in the next class, we'll speak about some of the amazing tarbiyah he has of Ibn Ata'illah. It's very, very interesting. But just to accelerate the story, because I'm conscious of the time, that he ends up being a teacher to many of the influential people who we hold as spiritual luminaries today. Of course, Ibn Ata'illah being one, whose life we'll discuss in the next class, the author of the Hikam. But also for some of you who may know Qasid al-Burda, right? This has been authored by Imam Busayri. Imam Busayri was a student of Abu Bakr al-Mursi. So if you go to visit where he's buried today, and so Abu Bakr al-Mursi dies in Alexandria at about 67 years of age, 1287 in the Gregorian calendar, and he's buried outside the gate of the sea. So if in the Corniche of Alexandria, this beautiful masjid is just off that Corniche, and there's a maqam there that they say is Imam Busayri's maqam. Others say it's not really his maqam, but it's attributed to him. And also next to him is another very important student of Abu Bakr al-Mursi, who's known as Yaqut al-Arshi. And Sidi Yaqut al-Arshi is called al-Arshi, literally the throne, because he was actually a slave from Ethiopia who was taken, forced into slavery, and he was on a slave ship, and so the person wanted to gift him as a slave to Abu Bakr Mursi. And there was some kind of, once again, a storm that happens, and then he decides, okay, I'm going to do this and gift him to Abu Bakr Mursi. And as they arrive, then Sidi Yaqut is injured, and then he says, I'm going to give someone else. But Abu Bakr Mursi says, no, where is the one who you promised me? And he says, so, okay, here he is. And so then he takes Yaqut, and Yaqut literally means like a jewel or a gem, and he takes him as one of his sons, and he raises him up, and he says that he was already chosen for me, and he's one of the fuqara in Allah. See again this relationship of knowing who his most powerful disciples will be, and then he marries Sidi Yaqut to his daughter, who's who? She's the daughter of Sheikh Abu Hassan Shadli, right? Because his wife, Abu Hassan Mursi's wife, is the daughter of Abu Hassan Shadli. So from Yaqut al-Arshi comes another lineage, just as from Ibn Ta'la comes another lineage of the Shadlis. And there was a great scholar called Imam Sha'rani who says, why was he called Al-Arsh? Because he said it's as if his heart was constantly connected to the Arsh, the highest point of Allah's manifesting himself in this realm of creation, and his heart was connected to that. And that's why he's known as Yaqut Arshi. So Sayyid Abbas al-Mursi is someone who, subhanAllah, you tell a person by the students they leave behind. And these are the kind of students they have. And so, inshallah, next class we'll discuss um, about Ibn Ta'ila, and we've got just about 10-15 minutes for Q&A as we normally do. So now the floor is yours. Oops. Any questions? Raise your hands. Sister Majda. Okay. Fadali.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for today's session.
Alaikum
I'm
salam.
just wondering, type of things that they do for tarbiyah for their students, are they like directly divinely inspired? Like, do we know? Like, how do they know to tell them to do this at this stage and to do that in this stage?
No,
And some of the things are very specific.
no. So the answer to this question, Majda, is surprisingly very much connected to the answer to the previous question you asked last week. And one of the things to understand is if they are real guides, as we believe Abu Hassan Shadli to be, and we believe there to be real guides today, they're not acting from the sense of human agency that is the common experience of you and me. So just as we said with the awrad, they're not sitting there with a spreadsheet or something saying, let me take something from here and what, this makes a really nice wird. I'll call it Hizb al-Bahar. No, it's literally a download that either comes in the form of some direct inspiration of seeing the Prophet ﷺ, or just an outpouring that's coming. And that's how their tarbiyah happens as well. I mean, there could be points where, and we believe that, maybe there could be points where there is a person who's now coming into this, but for the large part, it's kind of just just a flowing of just what needs to be done to meet this person without the agency of the mind being engaged. And you can see that happening just in some of the stories we mentioned, that, like, Abbas Mursi sees this vision and it's just Mecca, Medina, and he's so submitted. He just goes. He doesn't even know what's going to unfold. He doesn't know what it's about. Meets his sheikh. The sheikh, Majid, I think you've switched off the camera. And then when he meets his sheikh, the sheikh says Mecca, Medina, and then it's just an unflowing, flowing from that point. And what I love about that story is you can sense, I put myself in that shoe, there would be serious points of contention at different junctures where you're questioning the sheikh, right? And you're saying, what is actually happening here? And it's precisely in the submission to that. Now, obviously, if it's a fake relationship, it's prone to abuse, right? But even in, I was speaking to my sheikh, and the sheikh was kind of one of his moments of candidness. And he says, we have to test, but we don't necessarily test as hard as the other sheikhs, but there's subtle tests. And they're usually in the form of just instructions and requests to see, is the murid at the level where is the ego going to prop up and say, why? What doesn't make sense? I don't see any logic to this. And then if that's happening, the Sheikh was actually so gentle, in the Sheikh that I'm speaking about, he said, all we realize is that, they're not quite ready yet. And at another point, we'll give them another test, right? Some of the different mashayikh at different points had pretty tough tests and maybe reflective of certain regional tendencies. For some reason, the Maghariba from Morocco, especially with the Berbers, had pretty strong tests where they kind of break the human will. And when you go to the Bukhara and Samarkand again, you encounter the Afghan breaking the human will. But, generally, I think we're a time when people need a lot of Jamal, and everyone's got questions and doubts about the Tasawwuf, and they're on second guessing who the Sheikh is and whether there's spiritual abuse happening and things like that. So we just need a bit of understanding on all accounts. As one of the Mashayikh said, he goes, listen, you're not Murid al-Sadiq, you're not the most sincere Murid, and I'm not Sheikh al-Kamil, I'm not the perfect Sheikh, but let's just get on with it, right? So some of that exists, but part of our i'tiqad, part of our belief, if we believe that the institution be true, is that they're not acting through themselves. Does that help, Majda? Can you, so whoever's the monitoring, can you unmute Majda as well? Because I like the idea of dialogue between whoever's asking. So if you unmute Majda so I can see she's okay with the answer.
Yeah, that was beautiful. It was perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. You're welcome. You're welcome. So who's the order now? I can see Noor and I can see Ahmed, but I don't know who came first. Maybe the moderator knows. Someone. Okay. Noor, go ahead. Noor?
Alaikum, Dr. Jha.
Alaikum
I
salam.
had a question when you shared the dream by Abu Abbas al-Mursi, and he said, this is the Khalifa of the time. I've always been curious with this concept of, I've heard that, every 100 years, a new mujaddid is sent, to renew the deen, or, in a way that the people of that time can understand it. Could you share a little bit more on like the concept of like the Khalifa of the time, what that means, perhaps the Mujaddid of the time, what that means, and is that 100 years accurate, or is that an approximation? Thank you so much.
Yeah, if you're okay, Noor, I'll take an exit from this question on the basis that this is something that, as discussed in some books, there is an idea of spiritual hierarchy. This is called like a spiritual hierarchy of authority. But my teachers generally have said, and the idea of a mujaddid, you're right, this is a central Islamic understanding that they'll be renewed every time, but the Sufis have their own takes also on at every age, at every moment, not just every 100 years. As far as the cosmos exists, there is a spiritual hierarchy of governorship. The real authority is not political authority. The real authority is spiritual authority, who are, but my teachers say, and this is well out of my paycheck because I'm literally, um, Mr. Loser here. So, all I'll say is that what my teacher says, focus on the amali tasawwuf, on what is asked of me, rather than what is the business of those who are given to those ranks, because that's their business. And you find all this terminology, qutub and fard and ghawth and all of this. And, that's their business because that's who they are. And our business is to just make our sincerity with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There are scholars who've written about these things. And there's obviously, I'm not trying to negate the general benefit of your question, but I think in the generality of this group and what we're trying to focus on, it's probably something that wouldn't be beneficial even if we gave certain, cosmological hierarchies to the average person. And also it's beyond my, grade to speak about these things. Is that okay, Noor?
Yes, it's okay. I respect the nuance of that it may be a tricky, a tricky thing. Jazakallah khair.
No, no. But I don't want to, at the same time, I'm trying to answer here in benefit of public benefit. I'm not negating for you personally, but maybe that question has an importance and there could be things to look at. Okay. So I'm not trying to say that is not necessarily a question of importance for you. Sidi Ahmed.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Jha. Thank you very
Alaikum.
much for your lecture. I just have a quick question regarding spiritual mentor or sheikh. So in spirituality, in Sufism, is it actually important to find a Sufi spiritual mentor who's like hanging his Sufi credential to like one of the famous tariqah, whether it be Shadili or like Qadiris and whatnot, or would it be okay to learn from a spiritual sheikh that has basically a given divine kasaf, like a sheikh that who has experience directly with the prophet, seeing the prophet in an awakened state or like in a dream state? So basically, the way I understood it, as if like a medical doctor. Some medical doctors kind of like part of like hospital network that is famous and like excellence, and then some medical doctors do their own private practice, not necessarily associated with one of the big tariqas or the big turuk.
No.
Thank you.
So I think, Brother Ahmed, inshallah, and also if you stay on so we can have a little bit of dialogue, I think there's a bit of supposition in the questions, and I don't think they're coming out of nowhere. So there's two elements to that. You framed it as being, is there a need for spiritual mentorship? And then you went on to qualify two possible types of spiritual mentorship. One being a membership of the big tariqas. It's almost sounded like the big corporations, the way you describe them. And the other one being, or a membership of, the cash and, like private practice or something. So firstly, I'd say, they're not mutually exclusive. Someone could have cash and also be a part of tariqas. In fact, one of the ideas of so let's answer your first question before we jump into tariqas or private practice, is, and I've tried to allude to some of this in the Q&As that circulate on the WhatsApp group. As for the first question, is there a need for mentorship? I'd say absolutely yes. And the way of knowing that there is that we need mentorship in practically every endeavor of our life. For any area of outward knowledge, you find that it is through mentorship, through studying through someone who knows the subject, that you actually attain mastery. The state of being an autodidact, self-learning something, generally, and the world is found on means, isn't the most effective means of mastery. Right? And we understand that in any form of knowledge, but the more the knowledge becomes subtle, the more important that relationship of mentorship becomes, which is why you'll find lineages in practically every form of what's considered an art, martial arts, art forms, because there is a form of transmission that is beyond just objective parameters that can only be known through some type of tasting, some type of appreciation, which can only be gone through this rigor of this type of mentorship. And the nature of the spiritual world, and those who don't know, try it and see, is that the obstacles that we have are probably the most insurmountable obstacles we can face on the path of learning, because it is ourselves. What we're literally up against is our sense of self-identity that is so used to being us, i.e. me, that we've taken ourselves to be, that the element of that is so hidden. It's the shirkul khafi, that hidden element that they say very rare, if at all. And we don't say absolute, because Allah is capable of anything. Allah can take someone out of their ego without having a mentor. But it's very rare in this world of means for someone to come out of that, except they have had a relationship with someone who knows the pitfalls of the path and has come back from the path to guide. And that's why one of the definitions of the tariqah we gave right at the outset, if you remember Ibn al-Banna Saragoz's poem, but he said the definition of the tariq is that someone has been on the path and been on the path of tariqah, فَرَجَعَ, and has come back to guide. This is the true guide on the path. So he knows the path. So yes, you do need a spiritual mentor. This is just the nature of the world. Now, the second part of your question, is that spiritual mentorship generally to be found in tariqas as they've become institutionalized today? No, we can't form a general rule from that. And that's not the definition of the tasawwuf itself. The tariqas are an institutionalized format, and institutionalization serves a purpose, but it also could be a double-edged sword, because it could also fuel, as we quoted Sidi Ahmed Zarruq, ta'azzuz bit-tariqa, another form of identity theft, i.e. the I associating with the tariqa. And Sheikh Abu Hassan Shali didn't go around saying, I have the Shali tariqa. It was posthumously ascribed to him. But what is the tariqa really intended to represent? So let's go down to what it's representing. It's an institutionalization of these elements of mentorship, i.e. a teacher with a lineage, who had a mentor, who had a mentor, who had a mentor, who had a mentor, going back to the Sheikh, going back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? So that is the safer ground, because if everyone was to just say, I had kashf, and it's possible for someone to get direct, some of the biggest names, sometimes they had kashf directly, and they were just, and they have what they call an oasi connection to another sheikh, a sheikh who's not even alive today. These things are phenomena that do happen, right? But in the general sense of how things are connected level of means, this kashf too has to be under a mentorship relationship. So the sheikh can say, is your kashf sound, or has it been infiltrated by the devil? Because otherwise, where's the quality assurance on kashf? Kashf is not ma'soom. Somebody claiming kashf doesn't mean it's infallible, and that's why no kashf can be used as admissible for legal prescription in anything of this religion. Whether you believe in someone's kashf or not, they can't determine the sharia through kashf, right? So kashf also has a quality assurance of tariqas. Now, does that then mean, so that's why I said this idea of someone being kashf or someone being in the tariqah, they're not mutually exclusive. In fact, for the most part, most of the true guides would be in tariqas because that's what they're meant to preserve. However, and I think this is where you're coming from, do you have many fault sheikhs in tariqas today? And yes. And should we simply take the fact that somebody says Naqshbandi, Shadali? No, not a million times no. Million times no. And this is something the shuyukh would say themselves. Don't think that people haven't inflated their egos through tariqas. And don't think there aren't fake sheikhs through tariqas. And there can even be a phenomenon. There's a whole spectrum of sheikhs. There are actually sheikhs in tariqas who are still working on themselves. They're not fake sheikhs, but they're just working on themselves. And then there are shuyukh who are shuyukh. And for the most part, and I can only speak from my own experience, you're more likely to find those real shuyukh in these tariqas. And these really solid ones, Qadiris, the Shadalis, the Naqshbandis, because they have the lineages. But keep your wits about you. Does that help, Sidi Ahmed?
Yes, thank you. It kind of reminded me of like the three categories that Ibn Taymiyyah wrote about Sufis and whatnot in the later part.
Yeah.
So yes, Jazakallah khairan. Thank you.
And Sheikh Ibn Taymiyyah is also very interesting. This, I don't want to go too much into it, but the amount of love he had for Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani. And, with everything people say about him, he's now buried in a Qadri graveyard. So there's mysteries upon mysteries. Anyway, Sidi Bilal.
Assalamu alaikum. It's lovely to learn from you every week. I don't know, I'm already imagining parting ways. Bas khair, inshallah. It's been really great. There was a question that came into the chat that I seconded. I felt it was one that I would like to share as well. It's from Hajira, and it was, how can you develop a strong connection or a relationship with your sheikh if you rarely see or interact with them? And I think the addition that I would add is, and even when one might interact with their sheikh, what if the sheikh is very jamali and essentially offers very little advice? Even when you ask specifically for advice, they may say something like, you're doing good, you're on the right track, just keep going, something like that.
That sounds so familiar, Sidi Bilal.
Yeah, so both questions. The first one being, maybe the second question is more like, I sort of am inspired by this, like, don't take another dollar from anybody other than me, or something like that, where it's like the real harsh stuff. And I think I've been very harsh with myself and just in my life and how I'd like to grow. And so I'm very curious both about like when you don't deal with your sheikh a lot, and even when you do deal with the sheikh, when he's very jalali, and you're like, you know, where's the sandpaper? How am I going to get polished? Something like that.
I'll try and speak from my own experiences, as I always am trying to say here. Don't take my experience as being an absolute, but I'm sharing it in the hope that, you know, in my benefit of my experiences, this could benefit others. Once again, there is a personality element to Mashaykh, and that's something the Mashaykh themselves say, that this pure water flows, but it takes on the color of the vessel it flows in. And if we took that analogy of everything coming from this pure source of the prophetic water, but the tributaries, the color changes based on the color of the soil that it passes over and so on. So we don't discount personality elements, but to the degree possible, personality is not the criterion by which we judge a sheikh or not, right? That said, I would say there has to be an element of psychological maturity that accentuates and allows for comfort and healing in that dynamic. If a murid is so in awe and almost petrified of the sheikh, then that's not healthy for the dynamic of spiritual travel, because you have to feel comfortable in your own growth to be able to share what it is you need to share with the sheikh. Now, to come to the other side of the question, which is physical interaction and the time accessibility. Now, a lot of these things are very real questions because they are questions that come up in our everyday interactions with other formats of learning, right? You know, how much time I'm going to get, how much access we get to teacher, how much Q&A is going to happen. Now, the issue about this relationship, and let's just look at some of the life of the people we're covering. Obviously, in the nature of Abu Basr Mursi and Sheikh Abu Hassan Shadili, there's this deep, intimate companionship to the point that he gives his daughter in marriage, and they're obviously getting a lot of time with each other. But look at who was the most influential person on Abu Hassan Shadli's life, Mullah Abdul Salam Namshish. They literally interacted for a brief period of time, some say months even, on Jabal Alam in Tetuan. And then it's like, off you go. There's no internet access. There's no phone line that he can get back in touch with him. So now, how do we understand that? And what I've understood from my sheikh, who I'm with now, is that as we mature, and this is actually something actually actively practiced in certain lineages, so they call it rabita, which is your spiritual connection with the sheikh, that your connection transcends physicality. And if you start engaging more and more with the instructions of the sheikh, which is the real form of companionship that you have with him, then things start opening up, whereby Ibn Ajib and other scholars speak about this. You have access to him at a heart level, and presences open up, and you feel this. And I don't want to go into too much because it sounds hocus pocus to a lot of people, but enough to say that this discourse hasn't arisen out of a vacuum, except that it is a kind of interior empiricism, which is a term I'm using for what in Arabic they call mujarrab, tried and tested. And if you engage with this, then you start feeling your sheikh, and then you realize your companionship with your sheikh, or this mentorship, isn't the mentorship so much, there's probably a degree, with his physical person. It's actually a mentorship of your spiritual reality with his spiritual reality. And this brings us back to a line I forgot to say. At a certain point, Sheikh Abu Hassan Shadli looks at Abu Basr Mursi and he says, "Innama sahibtuka li'akunu ana anta wa anta ana." He said, "I only kept your companionship so you become me and I become you." And that is the secret of Suhbah. That is the secret of a heart communion, which can transcend time and space, which is why Uwais al-Qarni had a type of spiritual inheritance from the Prophet ﷺ, even though he never physically met him. And which is why there were people who may have been in the physical vicinity of the Prophet ﷺ, and all they saw was the orphan of Bani Hashim. And there were people who saw him from the eye of their heart, and which is why some of them may have seen him only once or a period of time, and they still become Sahaba. Some of them become the greatest of Sahaba, because the physical is a conduit to the spiritual. And what is sought in this path is that spiritual communion. And in fact, when the Sheikh realizes that is happening, then he realizes there is spiritual maturity happening. And as maturity happens in our physical life, that allows for a type of autonomy, i.e., now you have permission to move and to do things because you have certain connection. And there are other tariqas where it can be an almost infantilization of the murid, where he's so given to the prescriptiveness of the sheikh and the person, to the physical person of the sheikh, that, as one of my teachers said, the sheikh becomes an idol. And the whole point of the spiritual path is you break the idol of the sheikh so that the reality comes and says, Ha anta wa ha rabbuk. Here you are and here is your Lord. Does that help, Bilal? Someone's muting you for some reason.
Yeah, Assalamu alaikum. Yeah, it definitely helps with the first about the distance. And although you did mention something like some of the sohbah of the sheikh is in his instructions. And so the second part of the question was about the limited instructions, and a lot of the I started seeking a teacher because I was doing my own spiritual adventuring and, exploring many different traditions, and I was going in circles, and I wanted instruction, and I'm
No,
not
so
getting
that's a
it.
big part. No, so that
I'm getting a
if
lot
you
of like, keep going, and I'm like, okay.
well that is instruction. No, so
Oh,
if you didn't get keep going, so let's look back to this little story we had of Hassan Shadli and Mecca, Medina, and then go out and sell the wheat and just hang around and don't, or at one point don't take anything from anyone and for 1 year, don't ask any. So
right.
instruction doesn't need to be recite this, recite that. Instruction could just be keep going. But if you've got instruction, and more importantly, you've got someone to double check in with, then it really comes. If it's a real sheikh, just be patient. Be patient. And sometimes, and this happens with a lot of people, and I'm guilty of this as well. Sheikh gave me something and he said, this is going to lead to this, and I went to the sheikh and I said, all I'm seeing is how terrible I am. He said, that's it. That's the kashf you want, right? You don't want the kashf of the spiritual unveilings because that inflates the ego. The better kashf is to see your own faults so you know what you need to work on. So, some of it isn't, it's not, it's about just playing the patient game. So that is an instruction, to be honest. If your sheikh is saying, and that's actually a very prophetic thing to give people hope. No, you're okay. You're okay. Don't worry. You're fine. Just keep going. Keep going. And as long as you've got something to keep going with, that's your instruction. Things don't stay there. If the sheikh someone you can check in with, then at some point the sheikh will say something else. But that patience has lessons in and of itself. Does that help, Bilal?
Yeah. The thing is, it sort of is a little confusing because I don't know how much. Anyway, I also have a sheikh, and so the last time I was with my sohbah, I asked one of the elders. I was like, okay, maybe it helps to make it very transparent and clear. I had a shortened dhikr because I kept falling asleep, and I asked my sheikh, I was like, hey sheikh, like I'm falling asleep, is it okay? What can I do? And so I was given a shortened dhikr for quite a long while. At some point, I started to have this feeling like it's quite short, and I'm definitely able to do it now. So, but the sheikh didn't offer the advice to lengthen my dhikr, and I wasn't sure if I should propose something to the sheikh to offer back to me. So this was like a bit of a tension. So I asked one of the elders, and I said, I've been having the shortened dhikr. I'm not sure if I should extend it. I'm beginning to have this feeling like maybe I should. Is it adab? That's the other question. It's about adab, right? Because I had an idea of kind of joining the rest of the sohbah and the standard counts for the dhikr, and I wanted to well, it wasn't I wanted, I just felt that I could do it, and I didn't know
So
if I
Bilal,
needed to propose it, if that was
Nam.
bad adab or not, and
No,
so
there's no
I
harm.
did in the end.
Oh, you did. You
Yeah.
proposed. What happened then?
And that was when he said, yeah, and if you can, it's good,
Good.
was the answer. Yeah.
Good. But that's a very, by the way, just to give you a bit of so you don't feel completely alone and vulnerable in narrating that story. I've been there with the exact same situation. And what I noticed in my example was actually, and it took me a few years to learn the lesson because it's so subtle, that a large part of the madad, the spiritual aid, and what we learn isn't in the numbers, it's in our willingness to submit. Now, what often happens is when we build an identity, and that's exactly what happens, because I'm talking from my experience, I saw shortened number because the sheikh downgraded me, right? Because at one point I'm doing this and sheikh will go down to that. I saw that as, and my ego, and that's a natural ego, the egoic jumped on that, and that's how we do it. We want to peg ourselves. So I said, I'm down here. When can I get the graduation? Like, when can I get the graduation? And I'm moving and moving. And the irony was, the more the ego wants that, the more the nafa, the benefit of that litany becomes less. Even with less words, with the less of whatever it is you're reciting, but this sense of, this is where I'm at. And that zeroing of the ego, the light flows far more than I want this. How do I get there? And that took me a time to kind of learn. And I sabotaged myself so many times by what I wanted. And there's a point when I also went to the sheikh and I said, can I go on this? And after like badgering. And I can tell the sheikh completely saw where I was. And at some point, he probably had mercy on me and said, okay, go back. But you know what? I realized that to a certain degree, that was a missed opportunity in the way I was doing things. But there was also lessons to be learned in that pegging back and forth. So the subtlety of the dhikr is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to be with the mazkur. And when you have a dhikr that is very powerful, if you build your identity through my reliance on the dhikr, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to tell you that no, it's just me. And so sometimes, can you know me even when you don't have that? And that's the subtleties that we have to learn in this path. Does that help, Sidi Bilal?
Yeah, alhamdulillah. It's also nice to know that other people have had these sorts of exchanges, and distinguishing between, like, is it something that my ego wanted versus something, because it didn't feel like a big desire. It just felt like I can do this kind of moment. And
Alhamdulillah. So
alhamdulillah.
you're a million times better than me. And I'll tell you
Oh,
one of the
no.
no, one of the reasons I actually asked myself, why would my sheikh, he's given me thing to teach to a certain capacity, and I'm like, I'm not a sheikh or anything. And I actually thought, because I've been such a loser that I can speak from personal experience on a lot of these issues. Last question, Saida, just before we wrap up. I think we're conscious of time. How is the moderator for time? I just heard the adhan, so maybe 5 minutes, huh? Okay, yalla, Masaida, quickly.
Thank you so much, Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Jha. Lord my head. I think I have like streams of thoughts, but I tried to jot down some notes. Excuse me for my throat not being well, but two things come to mind. One is this asceticism within. I think you already explained that a little bit, but I'm wondering, when people are esoteric in their tariqah, in their way, that there is only certain compound knowledge, that people who are either, like we say in Pakistan, you have to have a bait, you have to have a, like you said, the mentorship, almost like a covenant with a teacher, a spiritual mentor. And again, women are not so much as known to be in that kind of a lineage with a sheikha. I have to do some research on this. My doctoral thesis is on Al-Ghazali, bringing it back into classrooms. And so I am trying to see Western as well as our own tradition scholars throughout the centuries and contemporary ones, how are they making it accessible? when it comes to having that teacher-student relationship that is built on the spiritual journey within education. In the US, Parker Palmer talks about that. He's been an educator, and he titled actually one of his short articles for encouraging teachers to delve deeper into their spiritual sense, because in America it's pretty secular when it comes to public school systems. But when I have taught at a local seminary, I noticed that, and I also took the course, Alhamdulillah, with the teacher who then hired me, that the Sharia course or the fiqh course, and we went over all of these different, like the fiqh school of thoughts. I imagine, like you said, that the journey of graduation beyond graduation, because you want to be a constant scholar, and you also want to make sure, like you said, that you check back in with your teacher, because you want to make sure you're not alone and you're not doing the practice of the wisdom in a sort of like just a ad hoc trial and error basis. So that brings me to the question that A, how do we make it accessible in the kind of secular world that we are living? Because I don't think that every family recognizes the value of this kind of a mentorship beyond learning a trade or a skill when the kids are getting ready for college, right?
Yeah. I'm just conscious
And
of
I
time,
and
sister. I'm conscious of time, Sister Sarah. So
yes,
yeah.
so the other thing is that when we are developing ourselves, I would imagine that the scholarly, that's why we have Shura, that the scholarly etiquette is to accept all different perspectives. So if you could please say something to that, inshallah.
I didn't quite get what the last bit was, but
So like if we have different tariqas or different ways of approaching different personalities, as you said, of sheikhs, how to synthesize their knowledge in a way that, like you said, nobody feels offended, but at the same time you have you are getting a gainful clarity around the whole of it. Like, you know,
well,
the spiritual.
for starters, you're never not gonna, you know, in this type of realm, as I said, you're never not
Yeah.
gonna not offend anyone. I mean, if that was the case, the Prophet ﷺ would never had people who were offended by him. You have to minimize that and make your intentions. But you know, in the very stories we've been saying, you know, Abu Hassan Shadli was opposed by the chief Qadi. Abu Abbas al-Mursi had someone. I can never make. There is no secular palatable. All flavors can be happy tasawwuf, because the bottom line will be people have been created in such a way that there will always be some people who believe it's all a bid'ah and is munharif and is shirk and is not part of the Sharia, and whatever you try and do, that's part of the divine play, that there are people who take that position. What is more important is that your heart is clean, not whether you make everyone happy with you or not. What's more important is that your heart is happy and doesn't have grudges towards anyone, and you don't bring enmity into your heart. That is what we have relative control on. And so that's what, you know, I would advise some caution on secular paradigms and how we reapproach this thing, because we're not, and I'm, at least in my capacity, I'm not interested, even though I have a partly academic background. I have a PhD on tasawwuf. I have a zero interest in Western academic expressions and how, only insofar as that resonates with what I think is the truths that have to be transmitted. And yes, there is a hikmah to be played with at this age. That's part of what this course is. You know, we can explore different ways of expression, different forms of languages, and I'm open to discussions. But I've opted out of Western. I have zero interest in making a name for myself or having some type of expression for Western, only in so much as, yes, there is a degree by which we have to make it accessible, but it will never be fully accessible, because Allah has not created hearts such that everyone can grasp this science. That's why it's graded. in the sense that some people get it and some people don't. Shaykh Abdul Ghani Nablusi said, لَقَدْ حَالَ بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَكُمْ أَنَّكَ لَن تَعْرِفَ. It's come clear that between me and you that you don't know at the moment. And that's just the nature of it. Because, you know, how people understand things, if we go back to discussing hikmah, is a paradigm of light. This is a disclosed knowledge. It's not fully a rationalistic, empirical, deterministic, objective knowledge, which always, to some capacity, also has, to want of a better word, a phenomenological understanding. People are contextualizing based on how they appropriate and understand it. So that's always going to be there. You're never going to be able to express, and even what you just said now, between the 43 people who've heard this, a large portion of them will have understood it in different ways. And I have no doubt in my mind that this talk that I've just delivered now, and every single talk I've delivered previously, has been understood in different ways by different people. So I can only try to the best of my ability to speak the truth that I think I can speak to in a way that most people can understand. And I'm very much aware, and this is the nature of this particular platform, that I don't know all of you. Right? Traditionally, a lot of this stuff has happened within formats where there are at least common understandings. There are people here who might actually completely inkar of tasawwuf. They've absolutely, they've come here and they just, the only thing they know about tasawwuf is all bid'ah and deviancy, and they just happen, oh, this looks interesting, let's see what happens. But in the course of this, hopefully I'm able to provide some type of way of realigning or understanding that. And that's part of the intention. I'm not coming here, and I'm not coming here with a missionary zeal as well. I'm really not coming here to convince anyone of anything. And maybe that's why it might have more efficacy. I don't want any of you to join a tariqah because I'm convincing you. If I can tell you that in my experience it's something beneficial, and I do think it is the strongest conduit of this light thing, if you think that's a true thing, then I'm speaking to my experience. I'm speaking to my experience. And maybe at some point you'll let me know how I'm doing. If I'm completely failing,
Inshallah.
you know, inshallah khair. I'll have to take permission from all of you. I said
Jazakallah khair.
I would
Thank
have wanted a dialogue, Sister Sarah, because it's the last one. There isn't much chance for that. Is that okay? I hope I haven't offended you or anything.
No,
Can you unmute
Jazakallah
her?
khair. Thank you.
Wa yaakum,
Jazakallah khair.
inshallah.
No, this is perfect. This helps me clarify a lot, but I take it from you. The sharing has to be with a very open heart, and
And
that's where you
honest,
leave
yeah,
it at.
completely
Yeah,
honest. And I think that's what, if you ask me, even proponents of the sort of this, there is sometimes this persona and this mask and this sense that we have to protect something, and this, and that actually, I think, makes it negative. Makes it
yeah,
negative. We speak truth. Are there issues in organized tasawwuf tariqas? Yeah, of course. Be completely blind not to see that. But does that mean,
right.
is that not accepted by the Sufi themselves? Yes, they do. They accept it. That's part and parcel of the human experience of how the ego takes things on. So,
Yeah,
but we want to speak about these things, and to a degree possible, I'm thinking when we explore the aphorisms, we can have some nice dialogue, inshallah. Okay?
inshallah.
سبحان وإياكم سبحانك وبحمدك سبحان العظيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.